The day started just like any other. The sun was barely above the horizon, casting a soft glow across the quiet street. The neighborhood was peaceful, with a few cars parked along the road and the sound of birds chirping in the trees. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. For him, it was the perfect place to settle down. The house he had recently bought had been standing for decades, and it had an old charm to it that was hard to resist. Sure, the paint was peeling and the roof needed some work, but there was something about the house that felt solid, as though it had withstood the test of time, the kind of house that had stories to tell. He was new to the neighborhood, still learning his way around, still adjusting to the quiet pace of life here. But so far, everything had been fine. He spent most of his days working from home, tinkering with small projects around the house when he had free time. He enjoyed the work, the sense of accomplishment that came from fixing things that had long been neglected. This particular morning, he was mowing the lawn, taking advantage of the calm weather before the heat of the afternoon set in. The grass had grown a bit long, and he knew it was time to get to it. As he moved the mower across the front yard, his mind wandered, his thoughts drifting between the different tasks he needed to get done. But then, something caught his eye. At first, it seemed like nothing. A small patch of the driveway that looked a little different from the rest of it. Nothing too obvious, just a slight difference in texture. He stopped the mower and took a step closer, narrowing his eyes. It was an old driveway, the kind that had cracks here and there with weeds poking up between the cement slabs. But this spot, it didn't quite look like the rest. The ground was uneven, and there was a faint, rusty color peeking through the cracks. It almost seemed like the surface of the driveway was hiding something beneath it. His curiosity kicked in immediately. He had no reason to think anything was wrong, but the strange patch beneath his feet seemed too unusual to ignore. He knelt down and ran his fingers along the edges of the crack, trying to get a better sense of what he was dealing with. Something was buried under there, something that didn't belong. After a few moments, he decided to investigate further. He moved back to the garage and grabbed a crowbar. It wasn't the most delicate tool, but it was certainly sturdy enough for the job. As he returned to the patch on the driveway, he felt a slight chill down his spine. There was something about the spot that made him uneasy, but he pushed the feeling aside. He was just being cautious, nothing more. The crowbar slid into the crack easily, and with a little force he pried the driveway slab up. It wasn't as heavy as he expected, and after a few moments of tugging, the slab shifted. He could feel his heart rate pick up as the rusted edge of something beneath the driveway became visible. At first, he couldn't make out exactly what it was. The rust was thick, and there was a layer of dirt and debris covering whatever lay beneath. But one thing was clear. There was a hatch there, something metallic and old. A hatch? What in the world? He stood there for a moment, staring at the dark shape beneath the driveway. It was too odd to be part of the usual construction of the house, and it certainly wasn't something he had ever seen before. He bent closer to examine it, brushing away some of the dirt. The hatch was round, with a faded emblem engraved into its surface. The rust had made most of the design unreadable, but the shape of it seemed almost intentional, like it had been placed there for a reason, hidden away under the driveway waiting to be discovered. The more he looked at it, the more questions began to form in his mind. Why would there be a hatch under the driveway? What could it be for? It was far too deep to be a simple cover for pipes or cables. It seemed out of place in every way. He leaned back, feeling the weight of the mystery settle in. He had to know what was down there. The idea of leaving it unexplored, of just covering it back up, didn't sit right with him. He was too curious, and the thought of something hidden just beneath the surface, the idea that it had been there all along, unnoticed, was enough to push him to investigate further. His hands shook slightly as he wiped the sweat from his brow, unsure whether it was from the physical effort of removing the slab, or from the sense of unease growing inside him. He knew he should probably just leave it alone. After all, what harm could there be in just pretending he never found it? But then again, curiosity had a way of getting the best of people, and there was something about this hatch, something about the way it seemed so deliberately concealed, that made him feel like he had to find out what was inside. After a few moments of hesitation, he grabbed the crowbar again and tried to pry the hatch open. This time the metal seemed to resist him. He twisted the crowbar, applying more pressure, but the hatch stayed firmly shut. He gritted his teeth and tried again, pulling harder, and this time there was a creaking sound, followed by the unmistakable groan of metal giving way. The hatch started to shift just a little. His heart raced as he pushed harder, the crowbar making small scraping sounds as it slid against the metal. With one final forceful tug, the hatch popped open with a loud snap. For a moment, nothing happened. He stood there, staring into the dark opening below him. The faint smell of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic, rose up from the opening. It was cool beneath his feet, and the shadows seemed to stretch out into an endless blackness. He wasn't sure what he had been expecting, but this wasn't it. There was no trapdoor, no hidden treasure, no sign of anything useful or valuable. Instead, it was just dark, the kind of darkness that felt alive, like it was hiding something that didn't want to be found. He took a deep breath, then grabbed his flashlight from his pocket. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. The stairs were made of wood, old and worn with time. Each step creaked under his weight as he slowly stepped closer to the edge of the hatch. A shiver ran down his spine. Something about that stairwell, that dark opening, seemed wrong. It felt like it had been there for a long time, and whatever had been kept hidden down there had been untouched for years, maybe even decades. He was still standing at the edge, flashlight in hand, when a soft breeze blew up from below, carrying with it the scent of dampness and age. The sound of distant creaking echoed from the depths, as if the house itself was groaning in protest. He felt a chill, but he couldn't bring himself to move, and then with a deep breath he stepped forward. As he stood at the edge of the open hatch, flashlight in hand, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. The narrow staircase leading down into the darkness felt almost endless, as though it reached far deeper than the ground beneath his feet. The air around him was colder now, thicker, and filled with the faint smell of old wood and something metallic, almost like rust. He took a few steps back, his hand tightening around the flashlight. His breath came out in short, nervous bursts. It would be easy to close the hatch, to forget all about it and move on with his life. After all, there was nothing down there that he could see. Nothing that made sense, but his curiosity gnawed at him. The need to know what lay hidden in that dark, secret space below the driveway was stronger than his fear. He couldn't just leave it like this, not now, not after everything he had gone through to even open the hatch in the first place. Taking a deep breath, he stepped closer again, the flashlight beam trembling in his grip. The wood creaked under his weight as he lowered himself to the first step, his foot landing on it carefully. He half expected it to collapse under him, but it held firm. The stairs were old, but they seemed sturdy enough. He moved down slowly, the faint sound of each step echoing in the silence. As he descended further, the temperature dropped. The cold seemed to seep into his bones, and he shivered involuntarily. He tried to shake it off. There was no reason to be scared. It was just an old room or a forgotten cellar. Maybe an old storage space that someone had sealed off for years. The walls of the stairwell were made of stone, rough and jagged, and covered in a thin layer of dampness. The farther down he went, the darker it became. His flashlight struggled to break through the heavy shadows, casting long, crooked shapes across the walls. The air smelled musty, like something had been closed off for a long time, shut away from the world above. He reached the bottom of the stairs, his heart racing now. He stood still for a moment, the flashlight trembling in his hand as he scanned the room before him. It was larger than he had expected, and the space seemed to stretch out in front of him, filled with the kind of darkness that felt suffocating. He could barely see the walls, but he could make out shapes of old furniture, shelves, and boxes stacked haphazardly against the walls. The place was a mess. The shelves were filled with old jars of unknown contents, their labels faded and hard to read. Dust covered everything. There were old chairs and tables, but they looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. A thick layer of grime coated the floor, and there was a strange, unsettling stillness in the air. But what caught his attention the most was the large metal box sitting in the center of the room. It was massive, and it seemed to take up most of the space. The box was covered in rust, and strange, unfamiliar symbols were etched into its surface. The design was intricate, almost like something out of an ancient manuscript, but he couldn't make sense of it. His mind raced with questions. What was this box? What could it be used for? And why was it hidden down here, beneath his driveway, beneath his feet? He took a hesitant step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The flashlight beam flickered and dimmed slightly, and he instinctively tightened his grip on it. He shone the light directly on the box, hoping to make out some kind of clue. But the more he looked, the more he felt like the symbols were shifting, moving, as if they were alive. His head spun with confusion and a strange sense of dread. What was this place? What had he stumbled into? He took another cautious step forward, this time closer to the box. The floor beneath him creaked, and he felt a strange sensation in his stomach, like something wasn't quite right. The box seemed out of place in the room, like it didn't belong there. It was too clean, too perfectly preserved compared to the rest of the mess around it. The rust on its surface made it seem old, ancient even. But it was unlike anything he had ever seen before. He reached out to touch the box, his fingers grazing its cold, rough surface. As soon as his skin made contact, a low, almost imperceptible hum filled the air. It wasn't loud, but it was there, deep, vibrating, almost like the box itself was alive. His fingers recoiled, and he stepped back quickly, his breath caught in his throat. The hum grew louder for a moment, then faded away. What the hell was that? He stood there frozen, trying to shake off the feeling that something was very wrong. His heart was racing, and a cold sweat had broken out across his forehead. He wanted to leave. He wanted to rush back up those stairs and forget this whole thing ever happened. But he couldn't. Something inside him told him that this was important, that this discovery was something bigger than just an old box. It felt like a puzzle, and every instinct in him screamed that he needed to figure it out. But then, before he could move, he heard something. It was faint at first, a low creak like a door opening or maybe a floorboard shifting. His breath caught in his throat. He turned quickly, shining the flashlight across the room. The beam of light bounced off the old shelves and furniture, but there was nothing. No movement. No sign of life. He exhaled slowly, trying to calm himself. It must have been his imagination. After all, he was in a place that felt centuries old. The house above had been quiet for years, and the air down here was heavy with dust and age. The sound he had heard was probably just the house settling, a natural creak in the wood or stone. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He spun around again, shining the flashlight in every direction. The room seemed to close in on him, and for a moment the walls felt like they were pressing in. The metal box, the strange markings on it, the faint hum, it all made him feel like he was standing in the middle of something much bigger than himself. Something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. He took another step toward the box, determined to figure out what it was. His feet shuffled across the cold floor, and the beams of his flashlight flickered again, growing weaker by the second. The room seemed darker now, more oppressive. The air felt thick, like it was full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. As his hand reached for the box once more, a loud bang echoed through the room. It was sudden, jarring, and it made him jump back, his heart nearly leaping out of his chest. The noise seemed to come from all around him, from within the walls, from beneath the floor. It was as if the entire house had come alive. He stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Was it just the house settling again? Or was there something down here? Something that had been hidden away for a reason? He looked down at the metal box, the strange symbols on it seeming to twist and move like they were mocking him. The urge to run was almost overwhelming. He wanted to turn and rush back up the stairs, to bolt out of the house and forget all about the hatch and whatever was hidden down here. But something in him held him back. Something told him that he had already crossed a line. There was no going back now. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The flashlight flickered one last time, then went out completely. Darkness surrounded him, and for a moment he couldn't see a thing. Panic began to creep in, tightening his chest, but he quickly reminded himself that he still had his phone. He reached for it in his pocket, his hands trembling as he pulled it out and turned on the flashlight. The faint beam illuminated the room, but it was weak, barely cutting through the heavy darkness. The shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should have, and every corner of the room seemed to hide something just out of sight. The box sat there in the center, silent and imposing, as though daring him to make the next move. And then, as if to confirm his deepest fear, the hum began again. This time louder, more pronounced. The box vibrated slightly beneath his hand. He knew deep down that whatever he had discovered was no ordinary find. Whatever lay beneath his driveway was something that should have stayed hidden. The question now wasn't whether he should open it. It was whether he could get out of there before it was too late. The hum grew louder, almost like a low, vibrating buzz, echoing through the air. It was as if the very room itself was resonating with the sound. the walls vibrating along with the mysterious metal box. His heart pounded in his chest and his mind raced. Every instinct told him to run, to leave that room and never look back, but something kept him rooted to the spot. It was as though his feet were glued to the floor, his curiosity overpowering his fear. He stared at the box, his flashlight barely illuminating its surface. The symbols that had once looked simple and strange now seemed more intricate, more purposeful. They almost looked like they were moving, shifting across the metal like something alive was hidden within them. It was hard to believe what he was seeing. It felt wrong, unnatural, like the room itself was conspiring against him. His breath came in shallow gasps. He wasn't sure how much time had passed since he had first discovered the hatch, but it felt like hours. He had gone from being a curious man simply trying to understand the mystery under his driveway, to someone trapped in a nightmare. The more he tried to comprehend what was happening, the more the reality of the situation seemed to slip away. He turned his head to look at the walls of the room, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had taken over him. The stone walls were damp, dripping with moisture, and the shelves around him were cluttered with jars and bottles of strange substances. The entire space was filled with old forgotten things, pieces of a past he couldn't even begin to understand. Everything seemed so out of place. Why had it all been hidden away? Why had it been kept secret for so long? As his flashlight flickered and struggled to stay lit, his gaze was drawn back to the metal box in the center of the room. The low hum was louder now, and he could feel it vibrating in his chest, a steady thrum that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. His skin prickled with unease, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. For a moment, the thought of just leaving crossed his mind again. He could seal the hatch, lock it all away, and pretend it never happened. He could forget the strange box, the symbols, the feeling of being watched. But the part of him that had opened the hatch in the first place, the part that needed to know what was hidden beneath his driveway, was stronger now. The desire to understand, to solve the mystery, was overwhelming. He took another step forward, cautiously this time, as if the very ground beneath him might give way. His flashlight's beam swept over the box again, and something about the way the light hit it made his stomach twist. The box was no longer just an object. It was a presence in the room, a force that seemed to pull him toward it. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing the surface of the box once more. This time the hum intensified, and the box seemed to shudder beneath his touch. The air grew colder, and a low, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to rise from the shadows around him. His heart skipped a beat. Was he hearing things? Or was there someone else in the room with him? He pulled his hand back quickly, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Sweat dripped down his face, and his mind raced as he tried to make sense of everything. The house had been quiet when he moved in, peaceful even. But now, it felt like something had shifted, like the house itself was alive, aware of his presence. The feeling of being watched only intensified. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and shift, moving in ways that didn't make sense. He glanced around, his flashlight dancing across the cluttered shelves, but saw nothing. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was lurking in the darkness. Just out of sight, the whispering sound returned, growing louder this time, as though it were coming from all directions. He strained to hear it, but the words were too faint, too distorted. It was like a language he couldn't understand, a strange ancient sound that resonated deep within his bones. Then, without warning, the metal box shifted. The top of it began to slowly creak open, as if responding to his touch. His blood ran cold. He hadn't done anything to trigger it, but the box was moving on its own, as though it had a will of its own. The lid rose slowly, inch by inch, until there was a gap wide enough for him to see inside. The moment the lid opened, a rush of cold air poured out, hitting him like a blast of ice. The room seemed to darken even further, the shadows pressing in tighter around him. The air was thick, heavy, and he could feel a strange pressure building in his chest. It was as if the very atmosphere had changed, the space around him no longer feeling safe or familiar. He forced himself to peer inside the box, despite every instinct telling him not to. His flashlight illuminated the interior, and his eyes widened in disbelief. Inside the box was a thick, ancient-looking book, its cover made of what appeared to be worn, cracked leather. The pages were yellowed and brittle, as though they had been untouched for centuries. The book was positioned carefully in the center of the box, as if it were the most important thing inside. But it wasn't just the book that made his heart race. No, it was the symbol etched into the cover. The same strange markings that had been on the outside of the box were now burned into the leather, glowing faintly in the dim light. It wasn't a bright glow, but a soft, almost imperceptible shimmer that seemed to pulse with an energy all its own. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the book for a moment before he could stop himself. There was no rational explanation for why he felt compelled to touch it. There was no reason he should want to open this book, to read the pages that it contained. But something deep inside him, something primal, urged him to take it. Before he could stop himself, he carefully reached in and grabbed the book. The moment his fingers closed around it, a jolt of energy shot up his arm and he stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The hum in the room grew louder, and for a moment, everything seemed to pulse with a strange electric force. The book felt heavier than it looked, as though the weight of all its history was contained within its pages. He held it tightly, his mind racing with questions. What was this book? Why was it so important? And what did it have to do with the strange hatch beneath his driveway? As he stood there gripping the book, a sudden thought struck him. What if this wasn't just a forgotten relic? What if it was something more? What if it was dangerous? The symbols, the hum, the way the room had changed the moment the box opened, all of it felt wrong, unsettling, as though he had unearthed something that was never meant to be found. He quickly glanced back at the open hatch, the stairs leading back up into the safety of the house above. It was tempting to just leave, to close the hatch and forget about everything that had happened. But the book, the strange symbols, and the feeling of being watched kept him rooted in place. It was as though he was tethered to the box, to the book, and he couldn't escape. The air around him seemed to grow thicker, heavier, as though something was moving, something waiting to be unleashed. The whispering sound returned, louder now, like a chant. He couldn't make out the words, but they were rhythmic, haunting, and full of a strange power. In that moment, he understood. He had opened something he shouldn't have. The box, the book, the symbols, they were all part of something much larger, something far older than he could ever comprehend. And now, whatever had been sealed away for so long was starting to wake up. The air in the room was thick with tension, each breath he took feeling heavier than the last. He stood there, clutching the ancient book, staring down at the strange symbols that seemed to shimmer and pulse under his fingers. The whispers continued, growing louder, a rhythmic chant that seemed to come from every corner of the room. It was as if the very walls were alive, speaking in a language he couldn't understand, but one that seemed to vibrate deep within his soul. He turned the book over in his hands, trying to steady his breathing. The cold, musty air of the room had become unbearable, like the darkness itself was pressing in on him, suffocating him. His mind raced, torn between the desire to understand what he had uncovered and the growing fear that this discovery had unleashed something he couldn't control. He had to get out of there. But the book, the strange pull it had on him, was impossible to ignore. Every instinct told him to leave, to run back up those stairs and seal the hatch for good. But something deeper inside him, something primal, urged him to stay. The book felt like a key, a piece of a puzzle he needed to solve, even if it meant facing whatever terrifying thing had been hidden away for so long. As he stood there, frozen, the whispers seemed to grow louder, more insistent. The language, whatever it was, became clearer, almost as if it was beckoning him, urging him to listen. His mind screamed for him to stop, but his fingers, almost of their own accord, began to trace the strange markings on the cover of the book. They felt warm under his touch, like they were alive, like they were waiting for something, waiting for him. The symbols seemed to change under his fingers, twisting and shifting in ways that defied logic. At first he thought it was just his imagination, the dim light playing tricks on him, but the more he touched the book, the more the symbols seemed to move, rearranging themselves as if they had a life of their own. He pulled his hand back, startled, his pulse quickening. The room was spinning, and his head felt heavy, as if the very air around him was growing thicker by the second. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. All he could focus on was the book, the symbols, and the deep sense of dread that had taken root in his chest. His mind raced with questions. What was this book? Why had it been hidden down here? And most importantly, why did it feel like the room was closing in on him? He glanced around. The shadows in the corners of the room now seemed darker, more oppressive. The faint glow of the symbols in the book cast eerie, shifting shapes on the walls, and he could feel a presence behind him, just out of sight. A cold chill ran down his spine, and he spun around, his eyes darting to the edges of the room. But there was nothing there, nothing visible. The whispering, though, was louder now, and it seemed to be coming from all around him, surrounding him in an invisible cage. He felt trapped, as if the room itself had become a prison. The walls seemed to shift, the air seemed to change, and he could swear he could hear something. No, someone moving behind him, just out of view. His hand trembled as he held the book in front of him. His mind was struggling to make sense of everything that was happening, but it was like trying to piece together a puzzle with half of the pieces missing. Every time he thought he understood, something new would happen, something that would make him question everything he had believed. The whispering intensified, now sounding more like chanting, a rhythmic, hypnotic sound that seemed to fill his head. It was too much. His thoughts scattered, his heartbeat racing as his body fought against the fear that threatened to overtake him. He couldn't understand the words, but he felt their power, felt them creeping into his very bones, into his soul. It was as if the book itself was alive, pulling him deeper into its mystery. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the sound, trying to push away the overwhelming sense of dread. He had to focus. He had to think. What was happening to him? Was he losing his mind? Or was there something truly dangerous at play here? Something ancient and powerful that had been locked away for a reason. The sound of footsteps echoed in the room, sharp and heavy. But when he opened his eyes, he saw nothing. No one. His pulse quickened. The air seemed to thrum with energy, and for a moment he thought he saw the shadows flicker at the edges of his vision, shifting like something was moving within them. But when he turned to look, there was nothing there. His body was shaking now, his grip on the book tightening, as if the weight of it was anchoring him to the ground. He couldn't look away from the symbols, couldn't shake the feeling that they were calling to him, urging him to do something he couldn't understand. Then, without warning, the ground beneath him shook. It was sudden, jarring, as though something deep below the earth had stirred. The vibrations ran up through the floor, rattling the walls and shaking the very foundation of the house. He stumbled back, his heart in his throat, as the room seemed to twist and warp around him. He glanced up at the ceiling, his mind racing. The sound of movement, footsteps came again, louder this time, closer. He turned quickly, the flashlight trembling in his hand, but there was nothing there. No figure, no person, just the dark, empty room. But the feeling of being watched had never been stronger. It was as if the very house itself was alive, breathing, watching, waiting. His breathing became more rapid, more shallow. The air was thick with tension, and his mind felt clouded, disoriented. He needed to get out of there. He needed to escape. He couldn't stay any longer. Every part of his body screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like they were made of stone, rooted to the ground. Then the whispers stopped. Everything went silent. The sudden quiet was deafening. The kind of silence that filled your ears with an eerie, unnatural stillness. It was as if the very world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then the book began to glow. At first it was faint, just a soft shimmer on the cover, but then it grew, brighter and brighter, until the symbols burned with an intense, otherworldly light. The entire room was bathed in its glow, casting long shadows across the walls. The air became electric, charged with an energy that made his hair stand on end. The floor beneath his feet vibrated, the hum growing louder, more powerful. His heart raced as he stared at the book, transfixed by the light. It felt as though the book was speaking to him, as though it was alive, aware of his every thought. The symbols danced across the cover, shifting and changing, rearranging themselves in ways that defied all logic. They seemed to be calling to him, urging him to open the book, to read its pages. He reached out, his hand shaking, unable to resist the pull. He had to know what was inside. He had to understand. It was as if the book had become an extension of his own thoughts, like it had been waiting for him to open it, to unlock its secrets. The moment his fingers touched the cover, the ground shook again, more violently this time, as if something deep within the earth had been awakened. The room trembled, the walls groaning under the pressure, and the air grew thick with a strange, heavy energy. The book in his hands felt impossibly hot, its surface burning against his skin. A voice, low and deep, whispered in his ear, but it was not a voice he could hear with his ears. It was inside his mind, inside his soul. and it was speaking directly to him, urging him to open the book, to reveal what lay within. But before he could move, before he could make the decision, a loud crash came from above, the sound of breaking wood, of something massive being thrown aside. His body jerked in surprise and he spun toward the stairs, his heart racing. Something was coming. The sound of the crash echoed through the house, so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations. It came from above, from the floorboards of the house above him. For a split second he froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The vibrations that had been building in the room now seemed to crescendo, and the low hum that had once been a background noise was now a full-throated roar, deafening and relentless. The floor beneath him seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy, and the air grew thick as if it was pressing in on him from all sides. He spun around, his body shaking as the sudden burst of sound shattered the fragile calm. The hatch above him loomed like an ominous portal, and every instinct in his body screamed for him to get out, to leave this place, to forget about the book and whatever secrets it held. But his feet felt heavy, as though the weight of the house itself was holding him in place, making it impossible to move. The air felt charged, alive with a kind of energy he couldn't comprehend. The walls seemed to bend, distorting his vision as though the very room was shifting in response to something beyond his understanding. He could feel it now, this growing sense of dread creeping up his spine and pooling in his chest. Something was coming. The room was suffocating, and yet he couldn't tear his eyes away from the book in his hands. It burned with an unnatural light, its symbols now pulsing in time with his heartbeat. It was as if the book itself had become a part of him, drawing him into its mystery, its secrets, and its terror. He knew, deep down, that whatever was about to happen, whatever had been awakened, was tied to this book. He could feel it in his bones. Another crash echoed from above, louder this time, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. The thud of each step was like a drumbeat, growing closer and closer, as if something or someone was coming down the stairs, making its way toward him. His breath caught in his throat. There was no mistaking it now. Whatever it was real, and it was coming for him. He quickly glanced around the room, his heart racing. The shadows that had once seemed so still now flickered, twisting and moving as though they were alive. The very walls of the room seemed to pulse, breathing in time with the strange energy that filled the space. The book in his hands felt impossibly heavy, like it was growing with every passing second. Its presence was overwhelming, and he knew that if he didn't act now, he might never have the chance to escape. But escape felt impossible. The house, his house, felt like a maze, like it was shifting, changing. The walls seemed to close in around him, the shadows creeping forward, and the only way out was the very same hatch he had come through. The hatch that now felt like a doorway to something far more terrifying than anything he had ever imagined. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, closer. The air became thicker, heavier, pressing in on him, suffocating him. He had to move, but where could he go? What could he do? With shaking hands, he turned toward the stairs, his body moving without thought. He had to reach the hatch. He had to close it, lock whatever it was down here away. But as he stepped forward, his foot caught on something. He stumbled, the flashlight rolling away from him, its beam scattering across the floor. The book slipped from his grasp, but he grabbed it in midair, his hands tightening around its worn cover, as though it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. He felt the ground shake again, stronger now, and the sound of something crashing from above rattled the walls around him. The footsteps were deafening now, pounding closer with every passing second. He could feel the floorboards creak under the weight of whatever was above him, whatever was making its way toward him with a terrifying sense of purpose. He had to act. He had to do something. Without thinking, he turned and ran toward the hatch, the book clutched tightly in his hands. The strange energy in the room seemed to push against him, making it harder to move, like the very space was fighting him. His legs felt weak, and each step felt heavier than the last. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't let whatever was coming reach him. He reached the stairs and scrambled up them, his hands trembling as he grabbed the ladder leading to the hatch. The sound of the footsteps above him echoed through the house like thunder, growing louder, closer. Whatever it was right above him now, just one floor away. He could hear it, feel it. With a burst of panic, he pulled himself up the ladder and slammed his hands against the hatch, pushing with all his strength. It didn't budge. The hatch felt as though it was sealed from the other side, holding him in place. His breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed harder still, but it wouldn't open. The pounding footsteps from above grew louder, closer, faster. He could feel the presence now right behind him, as if something was waiting, watching, just out of sight. He couldn't move fast enough. He couldn't think fast enough. It was as if the world had slowed down, and every second felt like an eternity. Desperation surged within him. He had to get out. He had to escape. With one final frantic push, he shoved the hatch upward, his muscles straining, his body screaming with exhaustion. And then with a creak, the hatch gave way. It was open. He pulled himself through the opening, throwing himself out of the dark, suffocating space and into the light of the driveway above. The cold night air hit him like a wave, filling his lungs with fresh air, and he collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. He lay there for a moment, the book still clutched in his hands, his heart pounding in his chest. The world around him was quiet now, eerily still. The footsteps, the crashing sounds, the whispers, all of it had stopped. The house behind him was silent, as though nothing had ever happened. As though the terror he had just experienced was nothing more than a dream. But the book in his hands felt real. It was heavy, its symbol still glowing faintly in the dim light of the night. He couldn't explain what had just happened, what he had uncovered. But one thing was certain, whatever it wasn't over. The quiet of the night seemed too peaceful, too calm after the chaos he had just escaped. He knew something was still down there, hidden beneath the driveway, waiting. Whatever had been unlocked by the hatch, by the book, was not finished. He had felt it. He had sensed it. He slowly stood up, his legs shaky, and turned toward the house. The lights were off, the windows dark. Everything looked normal, but he knew better now. He knew that nothing about this place, nothing about the hatch, was normal. The book in his hands was just the beginning of something far worse. As he made his way back to his car, the cool night air biting at his skin, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had only scratched the surface of the mystery. And he couldn't shake the thought that whatever was hidden beneath his driveway was far from finished. The darkness that had once seemed so far away now felt too close, too real. And as he drove away, he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. And most terrifying of all, what would happen if he ever returned?